Hi, this is Scott Bradfield. It's week 5 of writing short stories. We're going to speak this week about the topic of last week and the topic of this week, which is non-narrative prose versus narrative prose. Most of my students and most of us as human beings spend most of our lives writing non-narrative prose. We write information. We provide information and sales statistics and advertising copy, and we provide information to one another in various documents, whether we're writing reports for our job or essays for school. We're providing information, and our paragraphs and our essays are organized around information. Narrative prose is very different from that, and you could only understand and learn narrative prose by paying attention to the stories that interest you. Now, there's lots of good story writing out there. It's on the page, so you don't watch TV and you don't watch movies. You have to see how it works on the page. And you need to find the story writers and the prose writers that excite you. So you may not like Raymond Carver. You may not recognize what his qualities are, but that's fair. You may not like Hemingway or Alison Lurie or Joyce Carol Oates or the writers that I personally like. But you will find in the writers that you enjoy the skills that I'm trying to get you to recognize. And one of those skills is narrative prose. What happens in it is not information, it's two other things. It's time. We're watching time pass in narrative prose, and we're seeing that time pass through somebody's eyes. Point of view. Those are the two most important things I can talk about and to help you understand. So, we could think about what we won't be talking about is one of the many issues that's interesting about prose writing is style. Someone brought up this week one of Raymond Carver, an issue about Raymond Carver, which is that his style changes markedly in his second book of stories because the editor spends a lot of time cutting away a lot of his prose. His style is leaner in the second book, and it's tighter, and it's less explicit. Now, that's not an issue that I'm really going to try to talk about this term. Style is not as important to my mind as time and point of view. You can have a very rich, supple, lyrical style in prose, John Updike, for example, and you can have the same techniques in evidence in his work as you have in Carver's. So in terms of style, that's not the issue I'm trying to get you to focus on, though it's something you definitely have to decide and think about as you learn to write. We're looking at Carver because we can see these techniques right on the page. Fiction is not something in your head. It's something on the page. It's a physical object, good prose, and good story writing. It's on the page. It's in a book. And I want you to learn to look at these books and start thinking about how do they make it work on the page, and how do they translate these inceptions for stories onto the page. All right. Why don't they dance? Page 125 of our text. And I want you to listen for something in this, and that is, how does the story narrate itself forward? Opening scene. In the kitchen, he poured another drink and looked at the bedroom suite in his front yard. The mattress was stripped, and the candy-striped sheets lay beside 2 pillows on the chiffonier. Except for that, things looked much the same way they had in the bedroom. Nightstand and reading lamp on his side of the bed, nightstand and reading lamp on her side. His side, her side. He considered this as he sipped the whiskey. Now, think about how little information is in those 3 paragraphs. We don't know what his name is. We don't know what he looks like. We don't know where he lives. We don't know what happened to his wife. A bad, non-narrative opening of that story could well be, John Johnson really missed his wife since she left him because she didn't like him very much, so she moved away. And he decided to sell all of his furniture at a yard sale so that he wouldn't have to think about her anymore. He got rid of his bed that they slept in together, and he was deciding to get rid of many of the other furniture that they lived with, etc. Now that would be telling prose. That's what 90% of my students write almost all the time. Non-narrative prose. We don't care about what the story's about. We care about the character, who is, whether you like him or not. I find the character fairly interesting. Drinking, alone, looking out in the yard at the furniture he once shared with his wife. That's narrative prose. Now, if you look at the scene, look at that page. Now, this is the first scene of a story. So a story is broken up into a series of scenes. It's not one long story or one series of information and then another series of information. It's a narrative scene. He looks outside. He looks at all this stuff. Look at this big paragraph here, all this stuff out in the yard. And look at the end of that paragraph for me. 125, this large paragraph ends, and it says, he had run an extension cord on out there, and everything was connected. Things worked, no different from how it was when they were inside. Now and then a car slowed, and people stared, but no one stopped. It occurred to him that he wouldn't either. Now just look at the paragraphs. These are not hard things to understand, but you need to start thinking about stories as something besides information. The paragraph is doing a number of things. He looks at all the stuff outside. He looks at the fact that he had hooked up the extension cord. We don't know any other information about it. We're just seeing what he sees out in his front yard. The large block paragraph, the end of page 125, starts to end, and now he looks from the yard to the street. That's what paragraphs do. Paragraphs shift our focus from one thing to another. Now and then a car slowed and people stared, but no one stopped. New paragraph. The paragraph is not information. It's watching the street, watching the cars, watching people not stop. And then the new paragraph, it occurred to him that he wouldn't either. He reacts to what he sees in the street. Look at paragraphs. Look at why writers, good writers, shift to a new paragraph, and you'll start to understand why they shift to a beginning of a scene and to the end of the scene. And the end of the scene is it starts, he's out, he's drinking, he's looking at the front yard, and at the end of the scene he thinks, I wouldn't stop to pick up any of this rubbish myself. That's a whole scene there. And again, I can't tell you, there's no diagram for showing you how a scene operates, but you need to start looking at how the writers you enjoy set up a scene, deliver the scene, and end the scene. Next scene. Page 126, there's a break. It must be a yard sale, the girl said to the boy. And we start right away with a narrative sentence. Not Betty Johnson and her boyfriend Bob, who were looking to get married, decided to buy lots of furniture at yard sales. Those are the sentences my students are trying to write. We don't want those sentences. Right at the level of sentences is where you need to start focusing and learning from good writers. The second sentence, this girl and this boy were furnishing a little apartment. That's all Carver gives us in terms of information. And we get right back to narrative. Let's see what they want for the bed, the girl said. And for the TV, the boy said. And immediately in 4 lines we have one sentence of information, and we have a dialogue between a boy and a girl who want things. She wants a bed, he wants a TV. We have a scene. We have things happening, and those things are much more important than the information you may or may not want to shove into this scene. Now, I wanted to go on just for a moment, and we won't spend too much more time on this. We'll finish up next week. I want to talk a little bit about Cathedral. Cathedral comes from later in Carver's career. It's a much richer, more slow story than his previous stories. But it's very similar in terms of the way it develops. If you remember Fat, a woman works in a restaurant. A fat man comes in. She finds him a little repulsive, and a series of scenes occur. Him ordering, her trying to be nice to him ordering more food, her continuing to be nice to him, and then we go off to something else, something new, something that happens at the end of the story. Cathedral is a much longer story, but it's a similar setup. A man is at home, he doesn't want to be bothered. A blind man comes into the house, they have to sit together. and slowly they develop a relationship over this evening together. I want to close just by reading the opening paragraph of the scene that starts on 303. We're midway through the story. We're in the middle of the story. We're starting the middle scene. Your assignment this week is to write the middle scene of the story, not the beginning, not the end, the middle of a story. Something's already been set up. We know who everybody is. We know why they're there. And now something happens. He didn't say anything for a time. He was leaning forward with his head turned to me, his right ear aimed in the direction of the set. Very disconcerting. Now and then his eyelids drooped, and then they snapped open again. Now and then he put his fingers into his beard and tugged, like he was thinking about something he was hearing on the television. On the screen, a group of men wearing cowls was being set upon and tormented by men dressed in skeleton costumes and men dressed as devils. It's the last part I want to read to you today. And look again at paragraphs. The narrator of the story is looking at the blind man. He's watching him tug his beard, be reflective. You don't know what he's thinking about, and that's what he's looking at. And then we shift, new paragraph, to the television set. And we watch what the narrator is watching on the TV. The paragraph is shifting that focus. It's not giving us, I decided to stop looking at the blind man and look at the TV on which there were, we don't need that blather of information. We just need to use the paragraph to sharpen that shift. Looking at the blind man, and then we look at the television, and look at how that scene develops. It's a long scene. The later Carver stories are richer and they're much more complex in terms of the scenes. And think about how that scene develops and how it comes to a conclusion, and we'll talk more about scenes next week. Okay? Okay, thanks a lot, and write well as you can every day. Keep reading every day. If you don't like to read stories, you're not going to learn how to write stories, and those are the simple facts of writing. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.